Hello, San Diego Comic-Con. I'm David Baxter, executive from Legion M, and I am the moderator for the incredible impact of Dungeons and Dragons on culture and entertainment. I have some wonderful, distinguished guests on our panel that I would like to introduce. First off, Luke Gygax, son of Dungeons and Dragons co-creator Gary Gygax, who literally grew up at the gaming table. He's an author of several role-playing game accessories, and he is the organizer of GaryCon, which you may have heard about on Big Bang Theory. And I'm wearing a GaryCon shirt, and everyone should be lucky enough to go to GaryCon once. He's also the executive officer for the 224th Sustainment Brigade, whose motto is the Dragon Slayers. He's a lieutenant colonel. And thank you for your service, Luke. And next up is Brooklynite Deborah Ann Woll, graduate of USC's BFA acting program. She began her career on the HBO series True Blood, you may remember as the baby vamp Jessica. And one of my favorite roles, she played Karen Page on Marvel's Daredevil for Netflix. She's also the DM for Relics and Rarities. She's also been the DM for Lost Odyssey's Book of Knowledge, is a master DM and all-around awesome person. And third is Andrew Cosby, American comic book creator, film producer, screenwriter, and television showrunner. He's the co-creator of the hit sci-fi TV series Eureka and co-founder of Boom Studios. I think you will find these three individuals have a lot to say about the impact of Dungeons and Dragons on culture and entertainment. Before we get into it, what I'd like to do is to set the stage. And I'm gonna read a quote from really the first biography of Gary Gygax. It's called Empire of Imagination, Gary Gygax and the Birth of Dungeons and Dragons. And here it is. So that's by Michael Whitwer. You should go out and get this book. It's fantastic. In 1974, a small town Wisconsin cobbler stumbled on an idea that would forever change the face of popular culture: a role-playing game. The cobbler was Gary Gygax, and the game was Dungeons and Dragons. Within a few years, this geeky counterculture game had become a worldwide phenomenon. But it was ultimately stifled amid chilling accusations of psychological dangers, allegations of Satan worship, costly lawsuits, broken partnerships, and suspect business decisions, forever, or maybe not forever, relegating the game to the fringes of the mainstream. But perhaps this often overlooked and misunderstood game had a larger impact than was previously believed. That was written in 2015. And at that time, there were approximately 6 million players of Dungeons and Dragons on the planet. It's 2021. There are now over 40 million players of Dungeons and Dragons. I've got to say, growing up, I think all of us here started playing D&D at a reasonably young age. I was 12. It was 1976. The game was relatively new. This is the game that existed back then. It was a white box with a sorcerer on it, exploding goblins in front of him. So we had violence straight out of the box, and for a 12-year-old, it was a lot of fun.
Isn't that amazing? That's what we considered violence back then.
Yeah. I mean, I just have to say, I grew up with all of the kind of the controversy and so forth, and saw it change. But amongst all of us, I mean, there's nobody who had a perspective like you, Luke. I mean, this literally was your life. And I'm curious, really how you perceived what was going on around you. I mean, as Michael had said in his thing, your dad was a cobbler, a former insurance salesman, originally from Chicago, then moved to like Geneva, Wisconsin, which is where you grew up. What was it like for you? And what was that change in your lives like?
Well, as you know, children, are very adaptable. So I was young. I was born in 1970. Dungeons and Dragons was really written, the original version, in 73 and published early in 1974. So I was, it's been with me since my very earliest memories. But I can tell you this, once D&D started gaining some speed, uh, uh, I just noticed a difference in our lifestyle. We lived in a small house on 330 Center Street, which you can actually play D&D in today. You can rent it by the day and go play where D&D was written in Lake Geneva. And it was a very small house, and there was 5 children and my parents. So we were crowded in there, and we could only eat at meal times. My mom gardened. She had a 1-acre garden at my cousin Hugh's area that he would come pick her up to garden because we didn't have a car. We were poor. We couldn't afford it. And we would garden to help subsist. So we were extremely poor. We wore hand-me-down clothes and stuff. So eventually I knew when things were getting better, when probably in 77 or so, we went to the grocery store and I could actually buy the name brand cereal off the shelf. So that was my determination of what success was as a kid. But clearly, my father was an insurance underwriter for Fireman's Fund in Chicago, and he lost his job in 1970, right when I was being born. There's a whole story behind that. And he used to game at the office, and apparently the guy he gamed in the office, and he would get all his work done very rapidly because my father was an intelligent guy. And so when he applied himself, he would get his work done, and he'd invite friends in, and he would play a board game. So they'd make a move, he'd do a little bit of work, he'd take a move, and his coworker didn't like that, and that guy Bruno got the promotion and then promptly fired him when my mom was 8 months pregnant with me, and that was a 5th child. So
that was momentous.
Yeah.
I mean, many ways, had he not done that, we don't know what would have happened.
Yeah, so we should probably thank Bruno for doing that, because it certainly made Dungeons and Dragons much more likely. My dad asked my mom, would she support we'd either have to move for him to take a job elsewhere, or if she was okay with it, could they use his unemployment and he could try, game writing, and which he didn't do so well at writing a novel. And then, of course, game design. And he found a niche there that eventually took off. But my mom was supportive of that. But it was tight times. It was lean times back in the 70s, but it really paid off in such a wonderful way. Dungeons and Dragons was born and just opened up. I guess all this stuff may sound, I don't know, not profound today because it's so deeply penetrated our culture. But the idea of the role-playing game, it was new. It was created through Dungeons and Dragons. So if you think about it, these differences are really important. Typically, you'd play a game on a board or a map or a sand table of some kind. There'd be some sort of structure that would limit where you could go, the moves, how you moved around the board, whatever that was. Games were oppositional. There was a winner and a loser. If you think about Monopoly or Risk or something of that nature, and D&D really turned that on its head. So instead of being an oppositional game, there was a referee, or now we call him Dungeon Master, who would kind of control the game. And each person would play a hero in a story that you're creating together on an adventure, and you would win or lose pretty much together. And the story, another important facet of the story is continuous. So instead of ending like you play a game of Monopoly, somebody wins, you can't come back to that same game and continue on. You have to reset to the start position. And whether you're playing the hat or the shoe or whatever it is, when you come back to that next game, they're still the same. They don't get any experience or benefit or level up. So Dungeons and Dragons introduced all those concepts. There's no map. The map it's as boundless as your imagination. You're cooperating, and you go from adventure to adventure, and they're related, in your characters that you're playing, your personas, gain more skill sets or level up in this cooperative game. So all that was revolutionary, and it took a few years for people to catch on. But when they did, it was like wildfire.
Well, I wanted to actually comment on that. As one of the things that you said was, rather than being oppositional, it was these people working together. And one of the interesting things, I mean, you can label them geeks, nerds, whatever you want to call it, who were originally drawn to the game. There's a kind of a high level of correlation between, these people who sort of found a community to, do things together with. And many of these people were the first people involved in digital technologies, visual effects, and the performing arts. And actually, I'm going to probably throw this over, to Deborah, because there's a very large number of actors, directors, and writers who actually credit Dungeons and Dragons with being sort of one of the first times that they were able to exercise their acting muscles or their world building muscles or their creative energies. And so I'm curious how, first of all, you got involved with this, and a lot of these people who've done this.
Yeah, I mean, I am the most recent inductee, or I don't know.
Of these cranky old men.
Well, partially because of my age, but also because I did not start when I was 12. I started when I was 25 or so. So I came to it as an adult. But I look back on all that time that I missed, and there's a big part of me that goes, this was really what I was looking for in a lot of ways, and that the same thing that draws me to acting is very much what draws me to Dungeons and Dragons. And I think in some ways that means that I maybe play D&D differently than someone who went into the visual arts does, or someone who went into writing would. That, again, for me, the wonderful power of Dungeons and Dragons is how open and customizable it is, so that we don't all have to play the game exactly the same way. We don't all have to enjoy every single part of it. We can find the things that light us up and lean into that. So that's been really interesting, is to get to play with different people who come at it with different perspectives and what excites them about the game. So I'm a weird player because at least as a dungeon master, I'm weird because I'm so much more interested in my players than I am in their characters. So I think a lot of people love the get out of yourself and play a character part of it. But I like the idea that I learn more about you as a person, and that I want to know, how are you going to solve the puzzles and get to the end of the forest using the tools, which is this character at your disposal. So that, that always interests me so much more. And I think that's partially because I'm an actor and I'm so interested in that engagement.
You've made a great point. One of the things at Legion M, we're a production company, but I was able to convince basically all the people who work there to start a D&D campaign. And it's exactly what you're saying, is you truly do get to know each other in ways that you otherwise wouldn't in sort of the everyday world.
Well, and I'll offer this as well. Judi Dench, one of my favorite quotes, she said that acting is the shy person's revenge. I love that quote because it does apply to me a little bit. I'm quite shy in sort of personal social interactions. I feel very self-conscious. I really like parties, terrifying, but I'm a very vivacious, talkative, fun person, I think, when I have a task in at the same time as the social interaction. So I know that I am much easier to get to know when I am meeting you and also bowling, or meeting you and also playing D&D, or meeting you and also, hiking. I need that activity to loosen me up and to focus my brain on something, so that it's not constantly going, oh my God, why did I say that? They think this. I'm like, to sort of spiral into my own insecurities. So again, Dungeons and Dragons is, again, another quote I love. I don't remember who said it, but it's the nerdiest game ever created, but it requires friends. You have to have other people to play with you. And it is a perfect shy person's revenge. It's this space where people who maybe feel like they need that little support net in a social situation. And so it's been that for me. I've been able to meet so many more people that I would have been far too nervous to approach or get to know but through the process of doing this, and you're bonded in some way when you play a game together, when you take down a dragon together or save a town. There is a part of it that has that small cathartic experience that then goes, oh, we shared that.
Well, certainly in the early days, even, it was a haven for those people who felt like total outsiders.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I applaud about it today is its inclusiveness and its ability. The game has changed a lot since the early days. There were not a lot of women players.
Well, I think,
but there were some.
I was growing up in the 80s and 90s. So at that point, D&D was sort of in its downswing, I suppose, with, the Satanic Panic and all of that going on. So for me, it was very hard to find the game. I knew about it and I wanted to play, but I either couldn't find anyone who played, or the people who I knew that did play, it felt like they didn't want me. It felt like I wasn't invited to the party and that you had to have been. So much of the last 10 years, and you made that incredible statistic from like 6 to 40 million in 6 years. I mean, that blows my mind.
That's insane.
Insane, right? But
you've touched upon so many things.
I know. Well, I'll finish this thought and then please
no,
elaborate on what I'm saying.
No, listen, this is a conversation. So this can go on in because I want Andrew to comment on everything that you're saying.
Yes.
He's got some.
But just that so much of, I think, the part of why that growth has happened is that in the last 10, 15 years, let's say, it has opened up so much more, and D&D has really embraced or is still in the process of embracing a more inclusive, come play, again, customize the game even further, play how you want to. There is no wrong way to play this game. And I am so grateful for that, because I don't know if it had stayed like it was in the 80s, 90s, I don't know that I ever would have gotten to play. So yes, I'm very happy that it's evolving so generously.
Andrew, you've been DMing and playing almost nearly as long as I have, I think. And
like Luke and I are basically the same age, and he came to it earlier than I did. I came to it when it got a little more commercial.
Yeah, it would be surprising if you were playing it as early as Luke was.
I was their next door neighbor, and I was just stealing notes from their desk. And I started playing when I was so young that it was my older brother who bought the first set. And I couldn't even understand, neither did he really, but I couldn't even understand the rules. I understood enough to know.
I don't think anybody could, Andrew, the box set. I don't think anybody quite got it.
Like, I just knew there was graph paper and monsters. And so that was my beginning, was I would just draw dungeons on graph paper and take my friends through it. And like each room had a number. You get to number room 5 and it's like, there's a dragon, roll your dice. And oh, you rolled too high, you're dead. Like that's about as much as we understood. And then as I got into like, sort of like a little later in middle school, other people were playing. But I also grew up in Georgia. And when you talk about that Satanic Panic, like we were right in the heart of that. I mean, Georgia's like the buckle of the Bible Belt. And my parents, when they found out that like, mazes and monsters and, Satan worshipers are using Dungeons and Dragons to summon Baphomet, like they like, no more of this. Our schools blocked it. Me and my friends used to like bring our books to school in the fake book cover. So we had like our science book cover over the monster manual and over the, the player's handbook, just to hide that we had these books. And they would do like backpack checks and stuff.
Wow.
I mean, it was like the original, 5-ounce bag of dope was your Dungeons and Dragons handbooks. Like you got to hide it in your locker. You got to make sure no one finds it.
Sneak in your imagination.
Yeah. It's not my DMG, Mom. I swear, I'm holding it for a friend. And that was kind of what it was like. But for me, especially now that I'm a writer and a showrunner, like Dungeons and Dragons was, I wouldn't do what I do. I would not be where I'm at if it had not been for Dungeons and Dragons. I can say that wholeheartedly, without doubt, because that's where I learned to tell story. And I was never, I love playing obviously, but that was never what I was into it for. I was always into it to be the DM, always wanted to be the storyteller. We used to joke about DM doesn't just mean dungeon master, it means dice manipulator, because like I would like manipulate things behind that screen to tell the best version of the story while still trying to give the characters as much agency as possible. But that's where I learned to tell story. And frankly, when I got into television, it was the first time as a professional writer, because I had written film and I was kind of like a Tarantino-esque film snob. Like that's what I thought my life was going to be. And I discovered television, and suddenly like I'm the DM in a room full of players, but my players are my staff writers and my fellow producers. And it really felt like I was back at the table. It was the first time in my career where I was like, oh my God, I've come home. Like things have come full circle. And now they've even come more full circle, because the dirty secret that I'm not sure I'm even supposed to talk about is I'm developing a live action Dungeons and Dragons series. So I kind of feel like my entire creative life has come back around, and I'm actually looking at, like, it's so meta, and I've designed the series to basically be a campaign. I got to sit down as an adult professional and design a Dungeons and Dragons campaign that I'm getting paid to do, that will ultimately have, hundreds of people working on it. And it's just, there's a magic to this game that I don't think I've ever seen. And I've played a lot of other games. I love them all. I love role playing. Like Deborah was saying, there definitely was that it was sort of the original social media. It was like the original social connective tissue growing up. I grew up where my parents, I was almost like a military brat, where we just moved constantly. And I was a shy kid. I wasn't the kind of kid to like go knock on the neighbor's door and say, hey, is there someone here my age that I can talk to? But in a weird way, Dungeons and Dragons let you do that, because there would be the local hobby shop or the local comic book shop. You'd bump into other people. And every time we moved to a new town and I found myself once again alone, and I was always a weirdo, and I always felt like that outcast. But suddenly there was another outcast who's like, oh, what's your favorite, character class? Or hey, we got a game on Saturday night. And all through my life, as a young kid, I found that group. We'd moved somewhere. As a teenager, I found that group. I became like that punk rock kid who stopped reading comics and stopped playing Dungeons and Dragons because I had discovered girls. But then I discovered the girl that read comics and played Dungeons and Dragons. So I was right back into it. And then and we went off to college, and we used to come home from weekends on college back to Atlanta, and we would rent a room at Motel 6. And we'd have a campaign. We'd just sit and play in that room. And I can say there was a convention where I got my first job that brought me out to Los Angeles, was because I was a total nerd, total geek. There was Dragon Con in Atlanta. I went to Dragon Con and I met a guy who worked for Malibu Comics, and I gave him my resume, ended up moving out to California, and that was the beginning of my career. So, and the first script I ever sold, I sold to a producer named Akiva Goldsman, huge producer, who's been involved in almost every big geek movie you can think of. First script I ever sold, I was in a pitch meeting with him, and I was describing the main character, and he looks at me and he says, so you're, and I'm trying to describe him, I'm a little fumbling over my words, and he's like, so you're basically saying fighter magic user. And I paused, like I couldn't believe those words just came out of my mouth, and he took it the wrong way. And he just looks at me and he goes, come on, Cosby, like you didn't spend half your life playing Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. And remember, this is like my first professional meeting with one of the biggest producers in town. I said, can you just give me 1 second? And he's looking at like 1 second. And I pull his phone, he's got speakerphone, and I dial. And he's sitting there going, what is this kid doing? My mom answers. And I'm like, hey, Mom. And Akiva's like, Mom? And I'm like, I told you it wasn't a devil's game. And I hung up on her. And Akiva gave me the job. I mean, Akiva hired me, paid me to write the script. And so like, yeah, I can, like, it's not just, I'm not just paying lip service when I say like D&D has been there at like these really pivotal moments in my career. And
well, I mean, I'm first of all, I'm stunned by the news that you're actually working on D&D as a series. Clearly couldn't be in better hands. I mean, that's, I think that's one thing that
I gotta say that includes the producers, the people at E1. There's an amazing team at E1 that Hasbro has kind of put in charge of the film and the television. And the people that I've been working with, they get Dungeons and Dragons at a level that like it's difficult to believe. Like as when you think about when you go as a creator to go into a room of producers and you're kind of like, oh, it's going to be a bunch of producers telling me how to tell this story. Like, no, it feels like being at a D&D table. It's a bunch of creative people sitting in a room going, what if we did this? And what if we did that? It's been phenomenal. It's just been an amazing experience.
Well, it's so good to hear because, so many times when there are beloved games or books that are being adapted, everybody feels, who loves these things feels very far, far apart from it. I mean, part of the reason that Legion M was created was to kind of close the distance between the fans who love something and the people who are producing it.
Yeah.
And I think it gives everybody a lot of confidence when we hear that there are people who really understand a subject matter being involved in the creative decisions as things are developed.
It makes me
someone who loves it and has respect for it as well.
And
Totally.
enough respect not to actually try to adapt existing material.
Right.
Well, that's just it.
Like,
they're different
brand new
mediums.
concepts, so there's no toes to step on.
Well, and that the making sure that we're laughing with and not at things like that as well is important. And yeah, it just that's always gratifying. Sorry, Luke. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, makes me as a fan say thank goodness.
Yeah.
Because finally, I mean, one would think this is like one of the easiest concepts to come up with, right? You get to make an adventure. It's about pick anything you want. There's this ton of stuff that you can pick from. Make a story, make some characters, have some fun with it. And the movies thus far may have been, noble attempts, but they haven't been good. So I'm really excited.
I like the cartoon. I did like the cartoon.
Oh, the cartoon looks great. Yeah, as a kid, I freaking loved it. But with Deborah, what you said is very true, which is there's a big difference between laughing with someone and laughing at someone. And I think you really saw that in the comic book movies. Like comic book movies didn't hit their pinnacle until we stopped apologizing for them being comic book movies.
Yes.
Once the creators and the producers said, why are we apologizing? Everyone in the world loves these stories. Spider-Man and Batman, they've been around like way longer than I have. Like they live and they thrive for a reason. Like once you embrace that idea and you go, well, what is it about them that's so magical? And you pay homage to that and you embrace that and you stop pretending to be bigger than that, because you're not. None of us are. And I think that's what D&D is for me, is like, don't pretend that like your vision for what Dungeons and Dragons is so much grander than the 40 million players that are out there. No, be a geek and go, how do I create something that those 40 million players will be like, oh my God, that's so awesome. That's the key. Is it's like everything else in genre is be a fan and create that thing that you would stand in line for. We don't do that much of that anymore, but I grew up in the time period where if you wanted to see Star Wars on a Friday night or a Saturday night, you were going to go stand in line. You were going to go camp out. There was no other way to get that ticket. And so when I think about the stuff I work on, I think, well, what would induce a fan to do that? What can I provide? What can I bring to the genre that'll be different enough or special enough or funny enough or scary enough, whatever the case may be, to make a fan go, oh, I would have stood in line for this. This is fun.
Well, one of the things that keeps coming up is, why does it have this kind of impact? Why does this game, get under people's skins? Obviously, at the beginning, the impact on, the video game world was huge. I mean, if you've ever played a first-person shooter like Call of Duty, a massive multiplayer online game like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy, that's been directly created in part by D&D. This idea of levels, the idea of movement, all of that was there.
But more than that, cooperative play.
Yeah.
All those things you mentioned have cooperative play, which is something when Luke was saying, moving away from the board games, moving away from chess and Monopoly, like this idea of cooperative play where it's a group of people trying to achieve a shared goal. I'm actually amazed that it took like miniatures games to come so long to come around to that, because now you've got like all these like miniatures games that are cooperative, like Zombicide and things like that.
Yeah. And
it's like it's so fun to be sitting at a table with a group of people and all having a shared goal, even if you're approaching that goal from 5-6 different perspectives.
Well, I wonder if what happened in the 80s, didn't happen, whether all of this, might have been accelerated. But like when I grew up in Michigan, and at Michigan State University, there was a kid, Dallas Egbert, who went missing. That was the first time that I had heard kind of any negative aspersions cast on the game. And then there, I guess it was a few years later, 60 Minutes did a piece on Gary Gygax, and I think it was just Gary. David Arneson wasn't interviewed. Is that correct?
No, it was just my dad. It was in the 80s, and Arneson was kind of away from D&D by the mid to late 70s. So yeah, it was James Dallas Egbert III was the young man that went missing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you could talk a little bit about kind of the thing that derailed D&D, during that time, so that it didn't really, have the impact that it might have been.
Well, the Satanic Panic. I don't know that it derailed Dungeons and Dragons. I think it really brought it to people's attention more. So essentially, what happened is James Dallas Egbert III was a very bright young man. I believe he was, still a teenager of like 15, 16 years old, something of that nature. And he loved Dungeons and Dragons. He was at college already because he had advanced his studies so rapidly, and he disappeared. And his parents or no one could figure out where he had went. And he apparently had gone, they supposed, or at one point his friends had gone into this, like some steam tunnels or some tunnels underground, a good place to game. I don't know if they were LARPing, a live action role playing, or if they just wanted that space to game and kind of be themselves. So there was all sorts of wild speculation. And the movie Monsters and Mazes, which is an early Tom Hanks film, it's like deliciously bad. So it's worth looking at if you haven't seen it and you're a nerd.
How dare you, sir?
But it was
Monsters is cinematic genius.
But this apparently the young man had just was felt awkward. He was uncomfortable. His parents were very strict, and he ran away and just didn't want people to know where he was at, is my understanding. But this had become cloaked in this Dungeons and Dragons and Satanism, and perhaps he'd been abducted or things of that nature. And so that got a lot of news media. That created a lot of hype, and people would do things like have book burnings. Bring your Dungeons and Dragons books and burn them. Of course, it
good for sales, right?
It was good for sales. My dad was like, "We got some new books. Go burn your books, and then come back, buy some more, and burn some more." But I think honestly, that was maybe him just trying to have fun with something that he couldn't understand, because he was actually a fairly religious guy. He was a Christian, and so he didn't.
It must have hurt.
Understand. Yeah,
I'm sure on some level,
and my family
must have hurt.
My family actually got death threats. There's people who would park outside of our house and kind of wait for us. My mom had 6-foot cyclone fences put up, and we had like 12 Malamute Huskies that we'd let run at night just to keep people away. And my dad wore a bulletproof vest to Gen Cons, and I had an armed person with him. So we took it very seriously because there was enough of that. So it was definitely real. It was definitely scary. But aside from that personal side, if you're a kid and everyone's telling you, "Don't do this, this is dangerous stuff," it's like advertising it to teenagers, right? To someone who's 13 or 14, like, "Yeah, I'm going to play this dangerous Dungeons and Dragons game," right? And what it ended up doing is probably, there's so many people speak about the positives of Dungeons and Dragons and the things that it had done for them. I know, kind of looping back to some of the things that you guys have said, it's a conduit to friendship, lifelong friendship. You form these great bonds. I've formed so many friends, like the vast majority of my friends are through gaming, and lasted decades. And I'm not alone in that. I think everybody's, once you start playing, that the folks you play with, you feel a connection. And Deborah said, you share a little bit of that victory when you defeat something, right? You shared that hardship, just like a band of brothers or a sports team that goes through, a tough journey and wins championship. Sure, you're rolling dice at a table, right? But you're there. The tension is there. If your DM is doing it right, you feel immersed. It's not your character. It's not your fighter who's facing danger. It's you. You're facing that danger. Oh my God, you just got hit and took damage. You only have a few hit points left. This could be it for you, right? So when you conquer it, you share in all that, and you get that, that bond. and that exists outside of the game, not just in the game. Those are the folks that you feel connected to, and that you know who that person is by how they play, and so that helps you a bit closer. And I just wanted to those points are clear. And I think that's also maybe how people use Dungeons and Dragons to treat maybe post-traumatic stress disorder, help people with special needs as well, because you can kind of hone in on the person and maybe help them through some difficult times. I know that's worked for other folks, and I don't want to monopolize too much time, but
no. This is all
great.
relevant. This is all incredibly relevant. In the fact that you serve in the military, one, you know what you're talking about when you're talking about the common bond. And I think everybody here has encountered people who have almost used D&D as a therapy, as a way of dealing with rough times. So I think it's very relevant.
Well, even beyond the therapy aspects, D&D is there's something like you learn to embrace the unknown instead of like being afraid of the unknown. And we know a lot of the problems in our society come from this kind of fear of the unknown. And like even when it comes to like race relations, like when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, it teaches you there's something really cool about other races. There's something really cool about the different. Like I want to learn more about orcs. I want to learn more about dwarves, and I want to play a race that's different than my own, or I want to. And then I'm sure a lot of people, I'd love to see a study on this. How many people first sort of like experimented with gender identity by being like a young player who's playing someone of the opposite sex or their opposite, biological sex. Like I would be really curious to see how many people first kind of like learned about themselves, because I had a friend that would play female characters all the time. And he was a straight guy. He just loved playing female characters. But then later I had a friend in high school that was gay, but he wasn't out. And he started experimenting by playing sort of like female characters, and ultimately came out in high school, and like was like the first kid in my entire school to come out. And I can say I think D&D might have played a part in that. And I think that's pretty cool. I think anytime you can, it's like Deborah had talked earlier about like expressing yourself more freely in a gaming environment, and like getting an opportunity to kind of be more yourself, or if you're a shy kid, getting to be a little more outgoing and a little more vivacious. I think that's a huge help. I think Dungeons and Dragons certainly helped me. I don't think I could go in a pitch room today if I hadn't, spent my life sitting behind a table telling people you see a door,
Leadership has been less. I think I've always done better in the military as a leader, simply because I started off leading the party, doing the mapping, making the calls, convincing other people in the party of what to do, presenting ideas, all those little things that help you out. I got to practice a whole bunch of times before I went in the Army, just like maybe somebody would on a football team or organized sports team would as well, or some other organization. So,
I always like to think of D&D as well as practicing being a hero. It actually is a space in which you're being asked to protect the innocent, take down tyrants, solve the mystery, face challenges bravely and see them through. And I love the idea that in a safe space with your friends, you can practice doing the right thing. And I think as we get older, and now as adults, and especially those of us that are trained in story, we're curious about more complex stories, and really, can there be situations in a D&D story that challenge you, that ask you to make decisions that don't have a perfect right and wrong answer either.
Exactly.
And
trolley problem.
Yeah, so you can again, the game is that customizable, where you can play this with really mustache twirly right and wrong questions. I love those games. Those are super fun. Or with again, and this is where, like, when it comes to using it for therapy and so forth, I always want to put the caveat of like, make sure if that's what you're using this for, that you are with people that you love and trust, and that
totally,
because it isn't it isn't therapy. No one at your table is trained. Like,
That's right.
Get real therapy.
Amen.
Yeah.
But yes, that it is this safe space to reveal a bit more of yourself, to try on some other identities, I think, and that it's a space to practice being perhaps the preferred version of self, which is, we're all striving for.
Well, you know what I love about that practice being a hero is it also lets you practice failure.
Sure.
Like you fail a lot in Dungeons and Dragons, and it is part of the game that you just have to accept. Sometimes characters die.
Yeah.
Sometimes the dice just isn't with you, and you screw it up not just for yourself but for everybody. And you learn pretty quickly. People move on. They're laughing about it 10 minutes later. And believe it or not, that's a tough. I mean, as a father, that's a tough thing to teach your children. That like failure is the essential building block of success.
That's right.
And D&D is a great place to learn that.
It's play testing life.
It is. Well, I'll offer this. So again, as an insecure person who is very mea culpa, everything every bad thing that's happened to me in my life is my fault because I didn't try hard enough, or I didn't do any of this, that's what's in my brain all of the time. It was such a wonderful, D&D is such a wonderful device to go, oh, look, so everything is partly my skill and partly luck. So if I had a bad audition, instead of going home and going, oh, I'm so terrible, why do I even think I can do this? Obviously I suck. I need to just go be a math teacher. Who do I think I am? Instead I go, oh, my charisma is still a +6. I just rolled a 2 today.
Yep.
Yeah.
As opposed to my charisma is a +6. And usually, I roll 10 or above, so it goes pretty well. Today I just rolled low. It doesn't change my identity and who I am. And that mental trick has done so much for me in the last few years to just take some of the pressure off of myself when I fail, as Andrew said. So when I fail, when I don't feel like I've done my best, I can offer that I don't have to rewrite who I am in that moment.
That's a great point. That's a really great point.
Yeah.
Guys, we're pre-filming this. This isn't happening like right now for the audience. But we actually did get a couple of questions because we had made a post and asked. Anybody can take this. This is very specific. It says, I just finished reading Masters of Doom about John Romero and John Carmack and the creation of those first classic shooters and online/LAN multiplayer titles like Doom. They were huge D&D fans, and it seems like D&D was not only heavily influential for the games that they made, but also on RPG video games as a whole. Would love to hear everyone's thoughts about D&D's influence on modern video games. Anybody?
The whole thing, 100%.
I think we kind of discussed it.
Yeah, we touched on this, and it's not surprising at all. I mean, so video games, they needed an architecture, right? So D&D has provided the architecture for a lot of those games, with your stats, the idea of an armor class and hit points and going up levels. And sometimes during the pandemic, I got lonely, and so I would turn on the computer and do something. I just ended up being Luke's Lounge, where I'd sit down and have a beer or a Coke or whatever it was, and just talk to people and invite them into a Zoom or a Facebook room or whatever it is. And one of them was one time I had a game designer who worked on some of these things. He was a pretty accomplished game designer. Unfortunately, I forgot his name, but he would say, we'd go into oftentimes more than just himself, he'd go into design conversations with people with the D&D books, especially the hit tables and all the charts that my dad made with various weapon speeds and all. And he said and the curves, he said those were really good and kind of worked out well. And he said even they have computer models that kind of do it now, but he said they're really almost spot on almost everything. So there was just a lot of good work that went into the architecture wise for D&D. And the other thing is, it's probably what people are most familiar with. It's the lingua franca for role-playing games, and it's what creative folks go to.
Yeah. Did the idea of leveling up even exist before Dungeons and Dragons? Yeah, I mean,
Not
like,
that I'm aware of. I believe that would.
such an essential aspect of gaming these days is the concept of leveling up and boss battles and you name it.
Even beyond this, I mean, people talk about leveling up in life or leveling up in
Yeah.
their career. Like that specific terminology is no longer specific to gaming. It is, transitioned into everyday talk.
Yeah,
it's
I have a friend
ubiquitous.
of mine who's never cracked a D&D book in his life, but he loves to, like, every time something happens for me, he'll be like, "How many goblin points did you get for that?" And I love the term goblin points.
That's great.
He should trademark that.
He should. That's funny.
I have a statement from somebody. It says, not a question, but an expression of gratitude. D&D is a big part of our family. We play with our boys. And as the campaign unfolds, watching them develop their characters, interact with us, and be completely immersed in the story without any screens or electronics has been a gift. And then they made a little love icon. I think that is the gift that Gary and Dave Arneson gave us, is this play, this ability to play with your friends and just have a good time. I mean, that what a legacy for that game. Thanks everybody. We've been at this a while. We could probably do this for another 2 hours, but I've been informed that San Diego needs to cap it off at a certain point. But I'd like to thank each of you for coming and talking about the subject matter. And if you would, give people, if there's some social media or a place they can find you and learn more. Luke, for instance, Luke's Lounge, people I'm sure would love to join in that. And of course, Andrew, we're so excited about your work on the D&D series. We hope that all comes to fruition. Deborah, we want to know where we can find you next and all of these things. So let's go around the room. Luke, tell us.
You can find me at Luke Gygax on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. I don't even remember, but just Luke Gygax. So there's not too many of me around. So you'll probably find me. Coming up for me next is Founders and Legends. It's a stream where I talk about the history of Dungeons and Dragons and what's coming up in the future. So hopefully we'll have some interviews about what's going. Obviously, we'll talk about the past and give you a little bit of a history lesson, what we're looking forward to in the game. And of course, we're going to do the most fun thing, and that's play Dungeons and Dragons. And we usually raise money for a charity, such as the Children's Hospital, the Miracle Network Children's Hospital through Extra Life. And sometimes we also raise money for the Wounded Warrior Project that helps out, obviously, service members who are injured and need a little extra help. That's what I'm doing. So come see me at GaryCon Live is our Twitch channel, twitch.tv, GaryCon Live on on July 24th and 25th, Saturday and Sunday.
Fabulous. Deborah.
I'm terrible at social media. I'm pretty sure I am my name
I think
all
so.
of those things. So again, I've never met another Deborah Ann Woll. I don't think I've ever met another Woll. So other than obviously my relatives, but yes. So I think you can find me relatively easily there. I have no upcoming engagements or anything like that to share. But yeah, I don't know. I'm around. I'm doing things. That's all
awesome.
I got. I'll let everyone know if anything comes up.
Perfect. And Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, Googling Cosby is only going to bring you heartache. So I wouldn't do that. I'm at Andy Cosby on Twitter. That's about it. I have the social media presence of a homeless ghost. So that's probably the only way to really find me online. I'm just that reclusive a human being. But come check me out at Andy Cosby on Twitter. And then I'm sure as things move forward, I'm doing this D&D thing, and I'm doing another show, a cyberpunk series with Amazon. They'll force me to get out there and do a little bit more. So just look up, if you're going to Google Cosby, just make sure to Google Andy or Andrew Cosby in front of it.
Okay.
Or like I said, it's just going to be sad and it's going to ruin your childhood.
Well, hopefully it won't do that. Thank you all for coming here. Again, I'm David Baxter from Legion M. You can find Legion M on Legion M Official on Twitter and Instagram and on Facebook. or just go to legionm.com. And thank you, San Diego. We look forward, hopefully, to next year being there in person.
Here, here.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Luke. Thank Deborah.
Thank you
Good to see
all.
Thanks, guys.